The red flowers in Amy's garden were blooming again. She knelt in the dirt outside Bright Star Orphanage, carefully pulling weeds from around the small plants. The other children called her crazy for spending so much time with flowers, but Amy loved watching things grow. It made her feel like maybe good things could happen, even in a place for kids with no parents. New Haven was a quiet world. The grown-ups always said it was peaceful here, away from the big wars and scary things that happened in other parts of space. The orphanage sat on a hill overlooking green fields where farmers grew food for the whole planet. Amy could see the workers in their fields from her bedroom window. Sometimes they waved at her. The orphanage was home to 847 children. Some were babies who had been found after their parents died in accidents. Others were older kids like Amy, who remembered having families before bad things happened. The building was big and white with lots of windows and a playground where the little ones could run around safely. Mrs. Bell, the woman who ran the orphanage, always made sure everyone felt wanted. She said they were all one big family now. Amy liked that idea, even though she still missed her real parents sometimes. They had died when their mining ship broke down in space. Amy was 7 then. Now she was 10 and helped take care of the younger kids. That morning started like any other. Amy woke up early to tend her flowers before breakfast. The sun was just coming up over the mountains, painting the sky orange and pink. She loved this time of day when everything was quiet and peaceful. The only sounds were birds singing and the soft hum of the orphanage's power systems. She was watering her red flowers when the sky changed color. At first, Amy thought it was just clouds moving over the sun. But the darkness was wrong. It moved in sharp lines across the sky, blocking out patches of light in perfect rectangles. Amy stood up, dirt still on her hands, and looked up at the strange shapes hanging in the air above New Haven. They were ships, huge ones, bigger than the transport vessels that sometimes brought new children to the orphanage. These ships were dark gray and covered in angular pieces that looked like armor. Amy had never seen anything like them. Other children were coming outside now, pointing at the sky and asking questions. Mrs. Bell came running from the main building, her face pale and scared. She was talking into a small device, trying to contact someone. Amy could hear her voice getting more worried with each word. "Hello, anyone there? This is Bright Star Orphanage on New Haven. We have unknown ships overhead. Please respond." No. Answer came. The ships hung in the sky like storm clouds, silent and threatening. Amy counted 12 of them, all perfectly still. She wondered why they were just floating there. Maybe they were lost and needed help finding their way somewhere else. Mrs. Bell was calling all the children to come inside when the first beam of light shot down from the nearest ship. It was not like any light Amy had ever seen. It was bright blue-white and made a sound like thunder that never stopped. The beam hit the ground near the farmers' fields, and where it touched, everything simply disappeared. The dirt, the plants, even the air seemed to vanish, leaving behind a perfectly round hole that glowed with heat. More beams started falling. Amy watched in horror as they struck the small town at the bottom of the hill. Buildings vanished in flashes of light and heat. People were running, but the beams moved faster than anyone could run. "Everyone inside now!" Mrs. Bell was screaming over the noise. "Storm shelter quickly!" The children ran toward the orphanage, but many of them were too scared to move fast. The little ones were crying. Some of the older kids tried to help carry the babies, but there were so many of them and not enough time. Amy saw the beam coming toward the orphanage before anyone else did. It was like a finger of fire reaching down from the dark ship, growing brighter as it got closer. She opened her mouth to warn everyone, but the words got stuck in her throat. The beam hit the main building. The explosion was so bright that Amy could not see anything for several seconds. When her vision came back, the orphanage was gone. Where the big white building had been standing just moments before, there was only a crater filled with melted glass and twisted metal. The heat from the blast made the air shimmer like water. Amy fell to her knees in her flower garden. The red flowers were burning now, their petals turning black and curling up. She could not understand what was happening. Why would anyone want to hurt children? What had they done wrong? More children were screaming behind her. She turned to see a group of them running toward the underground storm shelter that Mrs. Bell had shown them during safety drills. The heavy door was already open, and Mrs. Bell was pushing kids inside as fast as she could. "Amy," Mrs. Bell called out. "Come on." Amy started running toward the shelter, but she could not stop looking back at where the orphanage used to be. 700 kids had been inside getting ready for breakfast. Now they were gone. Just gone, like they had never existed at all. The beams kept falling. The ships above moved slowly across the sky, their weapons turning everything below into burning holes in the ground. Amy reached the shelter just as another blast hit the playground where she used to play with her friends. The swings and slides melted like ice cream in the sun. Mrs. Bell grabbed Amy and pulled her into the underground room. There were only 11 other children there, all of them crying and shaking. The door slammed shut, and everything went dark, except for a small emergency light in the corner. They sat in that dark room for 3 days. Sometimes they could hear explosions overhead, but mostly it was quiet. Too quiet. Amy kept waiting to hear the voices of her friends calling out that they were okay, that they had found somewhere else to hide. But no voices came. When the door finally opened, it was not Mrs. Bell who opened it. Strange men in uniforms were looking down at them with sad faces. One of them knelt down to Amy's level and spoke very gently. "We're here to help you," he said. "You're safe now." But Amy knew that was not true. None of them were safe anymore. The galaxy was a place where people in dark ships could kill children for no reason at all. She looked past the man to where the orphanage used to be and saw only empty ground covered in ash. 835 children were dead. Only 12 had survived because they happened to be in the right place when the monsters came from the sky. Amy would never forget that morning, or the sound the beams made when they fell, or the way her red flowers looked as they burned. The news reached Earth through a single transmission that changed everything. A merchant ship captain named Bill Rogers had been the one to find the survivors in their underground shelter. His hands shook as he recorded the message that would spread across every human world in the galaxy. 12 children sitting in the dark. That was all that remained of Bright Star Orphanage. Within hours, every human settlement had received the recording. People stopped what they were doing to watch 10-year-old Amy tell her story with dirt still on her clothes and tears in her eyes. She spoke in a small voice about red flowers and morning light and ships that came from nowhere to kill children. The reaction was immediate and unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. On Mars, factory workers walked away from their jobs without saying a word. On the mining colonies of the asteroid belt, crews shut down their equipment and headed home. Across all of human space, normal life simply stopped. People gathered in town squares and community centers, not to talk or plan or argue, but just to stand together in shared grief and growing anger. The governments tried to maintain order at first. Politicians called for calm and careful response. They spoke about diplomatic channels and proper procedures. But nobody was listening to politicians anymore. Dr. Rachel Stone had been working late in her laboratory when the news arrived. She was a small woman with gray hair who had spent 40 years developing new technologies for peaceful purposes. Her inventions had helped build better farms and cleaner power systems across the human colonies. She had never thought about war. But, as she watched Amy's testimony for the third time, something cold and hard settled in her chest. She began pulling files from her computer, projects she had abandoned years ago because they were too dangerous. Ideas that could reshape matter at the molecular level. Theories about controlling the fundamental forces of physics. By morning, Dr. Stone had sent a message to every major human world. It was simple and direct. "I am forming a war council. Join me if you want to make them pay." The response overwhelmed her completely. Scientists, engineers, factory owners, ship captains, and ordinary citizens volunteered by the millions. People offered their money, their skills, their entire lives to the cause. Within a week, Dr. Stone found herself appointed as something called War Architect, a title that had never existed before because humans had never needed it. Her first meeting was held on Luna Station, in a conference room that had once been used for trade negotiations. Representatives from every human colony were there, connected by video links that spanned the galaxy. Dr. Stone looked at their faces and saw the same cold anger she felt in her own heart. "The Ralthari Empire believes they have taught us a lesson," she said quietly. "They think we will be afraid now and do whatever they want. They are wrong." She began explaining her plan. Every human world would contribute to the war effort, not just with ships and weapons, but with their entire industrial capacity. Civilian factories would be converted to military production. Generation ships would be turned into mobile weapons, platforms. Hidden shipyards would be built in asteroid fields where enemy scouts could not find them. But the most important part was something she called total war. Not war for territory or resources, but war to completely destroy the enemy's ability to fight, war to make sure they could never hurt children again. The representatives asked hard questions. How would they hide such massive construction from galactic observers? Where would they get the materials? How long would it take? Dr. Stone had answers for everything. Humanity had been building and growing in space for centuries, developing technologies that other species had overlooked because they seemed too peaceful to be important. Asteroid mining could be turned into ship construction. Terraforming equipment could become weapons of unimaginable power. Even their merchant fleets could be converted into supply lines for a war machine. The meeting lasted 18 hours. When it ended, every human world had committed to the plan. Earth would coordinate research and development. Mars would handle heavy manufacturing. The asteroid colonies would build the ships. The outer rim settlements would serve as hidden bases and training grounds. But they needed time, and time was something that had to be bought with deception. Human ambassadors to other species began acting strangely. They became quiet and withdrawn, speaking only when asked direct questions. When galactic leaders offered sympathy for the orphanage attack, the humans just nodded politely and said nothing about their response. This confused everyone, because humans were usually very talkative and emotional. Ambassador Lisa Park had the hardest job of all. She had to sit in galactic council meetings and listen to alien diplomats debate what should be done about the Ralthari attack. Some species called for economic sanctions. Others suggested a formal protest. A few even said the humans probably deserved it for expanding into disputed territory. Lisa listened to all of this with a blank face, taking notes and making no comments. Inside, she was counting days until the human fleets would be ready to launch. Every diplomatic delay was another week for the shipyards to finish their work. The Ralthari sent their own representative to explain their actions. War Prime Kelthos appeared before the council wearing his elaborate military uniform, covered in medals and symbols of rank. He spoke with the confidence of someone who believed he had won a great victory. The human expansion threatened Ralthari territory, he declared. We responded with appropriate force to defend our borders. This is standard military doctrine throughout the galaxy. When asked about targeting civilian populations, especially children, Kelthos showed no emotion at all. Strategic bombing of enemy infrastructure is a recognized tactic. The facility in question was providing support to an illegal colony. Our intelligence indicated it was a legitimate target. Lisa Park wrote down every word. Later, she would make sure Dr. Stone received a complete copy of Kelthos's statement. Every excuse, every justification, every cold dismissal of murdered children would be remembered when the time came for humanity's response. Meanwhile, the real work continued in secret. Old mining equipment was being modified into shipbuilding machinery. Civilian engineers were designing new types of weapons based on industrial tools they had used for decades. Scientists were running calculations that would have horrified their former colleagues who thought they were working on peaceful projects. The first ships began rolling out of hidden yards 6 months after the orphanage attack. They were unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Massive, angular vessels built with the same precision humans used for their finest, peaceful technologies. Each ship carried enough firepower to destroy a small fleet, and they were being produced faster than anyone thought possible. Dr. Stone stood in the observation deck of Shipyard 7, watching another completed vessel drift away from its construction cradle. The ship was almost 2 kilometers long and covered with weapon systems that had been theoretical concepts just months before. Its hull was painted black, except for a small symbol near the bow. A red flower, like the ones Amy had been tending, in her garden. Every ship in the new fleet carried the same symbol. The Ralthari had killed children tending flowers. Now those flowers would be the last thing Ralthari worlds would see before their suns went out. The galaxy still did not understand what was happening. Human space had gone quiet, with very little traffic coming or going from their systems. Trade had nearly stopped. Diplomatic contact was minimal. To outside observers, it looked like humanity was withdrawing from galactic affairs, perhaps frightened by the show of Ralthari power. They were completely wrong. Humanity was not withdrawing. They were preparing to advance further and harder than anyone had imagined possible. The species that had been known for building and growing and peaceful exploration was about to reveal that they were very, very good at taking things apart as well. The attack began with mathematics. Dr. Stone sat in her command center deep inside Luna's rocky surface, surrounded by screens showing star charts and fleet positions. She had spent months calculating exactly how much force would be needed to send the right message. Not too little or the galaxy would think humans were weak. Not too much or they would seem like mindless destroyers. The number had to be perfect, precise, and absolutely terrifying. 835 dead children equaled the complete destruction of the Ralthari Empire's ability to make war. The math was simple and beautiful in its clarity. The first target was a mining operation in the Proxima sector, far from any major Ralthari worlds. It was a large asteroid that had been hollowed out and turned into an automated facility. Thousands of robots worked constantly to extract rare metals used in Ralthari ship construction. Intelligence reports said 50 Ralthari overseers lived on the asteroid, managing the operation. Captain Rex Morgan received his orders while his ship drifted silently in the outer system. The TCS Vengeance was one of the new Orphan's Fury class vessels built specifically for this war. Rex had lost his own daughter in a pirate attack years before, which made him perfect for this mission. He understood that some things could not be forgiven or forgotten. His ship approached the mining asteroid without any attempt at stealth. Rex wanted the Ralthari to see him coming. He wanted them to have time to send distress signals and call for help that would never arrive. The psychological impact was part of the plan. The asteroid's defense systems activated when the Vengeance came within weapons range. Automated turrets began firing plasma bolts that would have destroyed most civilian ships. Against the Vengeance's armor, they were like raindrops hitting a mountain. Rex did not even bother to return fire. Instead, he activated the ship's primary weapon system, something the engineering teams had built based on terraforming technology. It was designed to restructure matter at the atomic level, turning solid rock into whatever arrangement of elements was needed. For terraforming, this meant creating soil and atmosphere. For war, it meant something very different. The beam struck the asteroid and began working its way toward the core. Rocky material dissolved and reformed into a chain of fusion charges, each one linked to the next in a perfect sequence. The process took exactly 12 minutes, the same amount of time the orbital bombardment of Bright Star Orphanage had lasted. When the charges detonated, the asteroid did not simply explode. It became a new star, burning bright enough to be seen from 3 star systems away. The light would shine for months before finally fading, a permanent reminder of what happened to those who made war on human children. Rex watched the new star bloom in space and felt a cold satisfaction. One down, thousands more to go. The news of the asteroid's destruction reached Ralthari command centers within hours. War Prime Kelthos dismissed the initial reports as exaggerations. A single human ship could not possibly destroy an entire mining facility. It had to be some kind of accident or equipment malfunction. But more reports began coming in. Human fleets were striking Ralthari positions throughout the border regions. Small patrol squadrons, supply depots, communication relays, and forward bases were all vanishing without trace. In each case, the attackers left nothing behind except empty space and twisted debris. These were not normal military strikes. Normal attackers would capture useful equipment and take prisoners for information. The humans were simply erasing targets from existence, as if they were cleaning unwanted marks from a paper. The attacks followed a pattern that Ralthari military analysts could not understand. There was no clear strategic objective beyond destruction. The humans were not trying to capture territory or secure resources. They were just removing Ralthari presence from space, one installation at a time. Dr. Stone monitored the progress from her command center, marking completed objectives on her star charts. Each destroyed target was marked with a small red flower symbol. The flowers were spreading across Ralthari space like a disease, and she felt a deep satisfaction watching them multiply. Her assistant, a young engineer named Paul, brought her the latest casualty reports. The humans were being very precise in their targeting, focusing on military installations and avoiding civilian populations, but the Ralthari military losses were staggering. In 2 months of fighting, they had lost more ships and personnel than in their previous 5 wars combined. The Galactic observers are getting nervous, Paul reported. 3 species have requested meetings to discuss the situation. Dr. Stone did not look up from her charts. Tell them we are busy. But they're offering to mediate. The council wants to arrange peace talks. Now she looked at him with cold eyes that made Paul step backward. There will be no peace talks. There will be no negotiations. There will be no mercy. The Ralthari chose to murder children, and now they will learn what that choice costs. The human war machine was operating beyond anything the galaxy had seen before. Ships were being produced so fast that intelligence services could not keep accurate counts of human fleet strength. New shipyards were appearing in systems that had been empty just months before. Entire asteroid belts were being converted into construction facilities. But the most frightening part was the efficiency. Human forces struck with perfect coordination, hitting dozens of targets simultaneously across hundreds of light years. Communication between human fleets was instant, despite the vast distances involved, suggesting they had developed technology that bypassed normal space-time limitations. Admiral Beth Clark commanded the human forces in the outer rim sectors. Her job was to cut off Ralthari supply lines and prevent them from reinforcing their border defenses. She had been a merchant captain before the war, running cargo between the outer colonies. Now she commanded a fleet of 200 warships, each one capable of destroying entire star systems. Her ships moved through Ralthari space like ghosts, appearing without warning to destroy their targets, and vanishing before enemy reinforcements could arrive. The Ralthari military was beginning to abandon their forward positions, falling back toward their core worlds in hopes of establishing a defensive line. But there was no defense against what the humans were doing. They were not conquering territory or occupying worlds. They were systematically removing every trace of Ralthari military presence from space, working their way steadily toward the Empire's heart. The psychological impact on Ralthari forces was devastating. Soldiers who had never known defeat were abandoning their posts and deserting in massive numbers. Reports reached Ralthari High Command of entire garrisons surrendering to human forces, only to be ignored completely. The humans would destroy the military installations and leave the surrendered soldiers on nearby planets with nothing but basic survival supplies. They were not interested in prisoners. They were not interested in territory. They were interested only in the complete destruction of Ralthari military power, carried out with the same methodical precision they had once used to build interstellar colonies. War Prime Kelthos began to understand that he had made a terrible mistake. The humans were not responding like any other species the Ralthari had fought. They were not seeking advantage or negotiating position. They were conducting what could only be described as extermination, carried out with terrifying efficiency and unlimited resources. His advisors brought him reports of human industrial capacity that seemed impossible. Entire star systems were being converted to war production. Mining operations that had taken decades to establish were being repurposed for military manufacturing in a matter of weeks. The humans appeared to have unlimited ships, unlimited weapons, and unlimited determination. In his private chambers, Kelthos began to question whether his empire could survive what it had awakened. The attack on the orphanage had been intended, as a simple demonstration of power, a way to discourage human expansion without significant cost or risk. Instead, it had triggered a response that threatened to destroy everything the Ralthari had built over centuries of conquest. But there was no way to stop what was coming. The humans had made their decision, and they were executing it with the same relentless precision they brought to every task. The Ralthari Empire was being systematically dismantled, one military installation at a time, and nothing seemed capable of slowing the process. Dr. Stone added another red flower to her chart and smiled coldly. The mathematics of vengeance were working perfectly. The conference room on the Galactic Council station had never been so quiet. Ambassador Lisa Park walked to the podium with steady steps, carrying a small data pad that contained humanity's final message to the galaxy. Representatives from 47 different species watched her with nervous attention. Everyone knew something terrible was coming. Lisa looked around the room at faces that showed fear, curiosity, and in some cases, barely hidden satisfaction. A few species had secretly enjoyed watching the Ralthari Empire get torn apart by human forces. Others were terrified that they might be next. All of them wanted to know what humanity planned to do, now that Ralthari military power had been almost completely destroyed. She activated the holographic display above her head and showed them an image of the Ralthari homeworld. Keltara was a beautiful planet, covered in purple oceans and golden continents. 15 billion Ralthari lived there in massive cities that gleamed like jewels from orbit. It was the heart of an empire that had ruled dozens of star systems for over 1,000 years. In 72 hours, Lisa said calmly, "We will demonstrate what total war means." The room erupted in shocked voices. Representatives jumped to their feet, shouting questions and protests. The Galactic Council chairman, a tall creature with blue skin and too many arms, banged his ceremonial staff for order. "Ambassador Park," he said when the noise died down, "surely you cannot mean to attack a civilian population center. The Galactic Conventions forbid such actions." Lisa's expression did not change. The Ralthari violated those same conventions when they murdered 835 children. We are simply applying their own standards of warfare. But there are 15 billion innocent people on that world. There were 835 innocent children in that orphanage. The Ralthari gave them no warning and no chance to escape. We are being more merciful than they were. She activated another display showing the massive human fleet that now surrounded Keltara. Over 10,000 ships hung in space around the planet, more military vessels than most species had even known existed. The ships were arranged in perfect formations, their black hulls marked with red flower symbols that had become humanity's signature during the war. "All civilian populations have 72 hours to evacuate Keltara," Lisa continued. "Any ship or station that assists with evacuation will be allowed to pass safely. After the deadline, anyone remaining on the planet will share its fate." The Galactic Council session descended into chaos. Some representatives demanded that the Council take action to stop humanity. Others pointed out that no force in the galaxy could challenge the human fleet currently surrounding Keltara. A few species immediately offered to provide evacuation ships, horrified by the implications of what was coming. Lisa gathered her materials and walked toward the exit. The chairman called after her, desperation clear in his voice. "Ambassador, please reconsider. This will change everything. The galaxy will never be the same." She paused at the doorway and looked back at him with cold eyes. "The galaxy changed the moment they decided to murder children. We are simply making sure everyone understands the new reality." The evacuation began immediately. Ships from dozens of species converged on Keltara, racing against time to remove as many civilians as possible. The human fleet allowed them to pass without interference, just as Lisa had promised. Every evacuation ship was scanned to ensure it carried only civilians and no military personnel or equipment. Dr. Stone watched the evacuation progress from her command ship, the TCS Retribution. The massive vessel hung at the edge of the Keltara system, directing the final preparations for humanity's demonstration. Her engineers had spent months developing the technology they would use, adapting stellar engineering equipment for purposes its creators had never imagined. The method they had chosen was elegant in its simplicity. Keltara's magnetic field would be destabilized using focused gravitational pulses. Without magnetic protection, the planet's atmosphere would be stripped away layer by solar radiation. The crust would then be subjected to molecular disintegration beams, reducing the entire world to component atoms arranged in a perfect sphere. It would take exactly 12 minutes, the same amount of time the Orphanage bombardment had lasted. War Prime. Kelthos made his final broadcast from the Planetary Defense Center as the deadline approached. Most of his military had already evacuated or surrendered, but he had chosen to remain with a small group of loyal officers. He appeared on screens throughout the galaxy, wearing his dress uniform covered in medals from a dozen victorious campaigns. "I am Kelthos, War Prime of the Ralthari Empire," he said with dignity that impressed even his enemies. "We chose to demonstrate our strength by attacking a human colony. The humans have chosen to demonstrate theirs by destroying our homeworld. History will judge which choice was correct." He paused to look directly into the camera. "To the human commanders, you have proven your point. Your species is more dangerous than we believed possible. We surrender unconditionally and will accept whatever terms you choose to impose." The transmission ended, but the human fleet did not stand down. Surrender was no longer an option. The demonstration would proceed as planned. Amy watched the broadcast from her new home on Earth, where the 12 survivors of Bright Star Orphanage had been brought for safety. She was 13 now, no longer the little girl who had tended red flowers in the orphanage garden. The war had changed her, just as it had changed everything else in the galaxy. She understood why the demonstration was necessary. The Ralthari had to be shown that actions have consequences. Other species had to see what happened to those who made war on children. The galaxy needed to learn that humanity would go to any length to protect the innocent. But watching War Prime Kelthos face his fate with dignity, she felt something she had not expected. Not sympathy exactly, but a recognition that he was accepting responsibility for his choices. That was more than most leaders would do. The deadline passed at exactly 12 hours, 37 minutes, and 14 seconds after Lisa Park's announcement. Dr. Stone gave the order with a voice that showed no emotion at all. "Begin the demonstration." The human fleet moved with perfect coordination. Gravitational pulse generators activated simultaneously, sending focused waves of distorted space-time toward Keltara's magnetic core. The planet's protective field flickered and died, leaving 15 billion people exposed to the radiation of their own sun. Atmospheric stripping began immediately. The outermost layers of air were pulled away into space, creating brilliant auroras that could be seen from the observation decks of evacuation ships. The process accelerated as each layer was removed, exposing the surface to increasingly deadly radiation. Then the molecular disintegration beams activated. These were the most advanced weapons humanity had ever built, capable of breaking the bonds between atoms and rearranging matter at the fundamental level. They swept across Keltara's surface in precise patterns, reducing mountains, oceans, and cities to clouds of elementary particles. The watching galaxy saw a world die in real time. News networks broadcast the destruction live, showing billions of viewers exactly what humanity was capable of when pushed beyond all limits. The planet that had been the center of a mighty empire became an expanding cloud of atoms, then reformed into a perfect sphere of asteroids surrounding a monument beacon. When it was over, Dr. Stone activated the beacon that would broadcast from the center of the new asteroid field. The message was simple and would repeat forever. Here stood those who made war on children. Within hours, every remaining Ralthari world had surrendered unconditionally. The few Ralthari fleets still operating in distant systems abandoned their posts and fled to neutral territory. The empire that had seemed so powerful just 2 years before had been reduced to scattered refugees, begging for asylum on alien worlds. But the demonstration's real target had not been the Ralthari. It had been every other species in the galaxy, all of whom had watched a planet die and understood that humanity now possessed the power to end civilizations. The message was clear. Those who protected children would find humanity to be their greatest ally. Those who harmed children would face consequences beyond imagination. The galaxy would never be the same, just as the council chairman had predicted. But Dr. Stone felt no regret as she watched the beacon begin its eternal broadcast. 835 children had died for no reason, except Ralthari arrogance. Now everyone would remember their names and understand the price of such choices. The demonstration was complete. The lesson had been taught. Humanity had shown the galaxy exactly what total war meant. 5 years had passed since Keltara became an asteroid field, and Amy was preparing for her first diplomatic assignment. She stood in front of a mirror in her apartment on Earth, adjusting the formal uniform of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. The design was simple but elegant, with a small red flower emblem on the collar that reminded everyone of why the Corps existed. At 18, Amy was the youngest ambassador in galactic history. The other survivors from Bright Star Orphanage had also joined the diplomatic service, becoming humanity's voice in a galaxy that now listened very carefully to what humans had to say. Their childhood experiences had given them a unique understanding of both innocence and loss, making them perfect representatives for their species. Her first assignment was to attend the ceremony establishing the Bright Star Accords, a new galactic treaty that would define attacks on civilian populations as crimes against all sentient life. The signing would take place on New Haven, where the orphanage had once stood and where it had been rebuilt as a center of learning for the entire galaxy. Amy took a transport ship to New Haven, traveling with delegates from 43 different species. The journey gave her time to review the treaty documents and prepare for the questions she would certainly face. Many species were still adjusting to the new reality, where humanity held ultimate enforcement power over galactic law. The rebuilt orphanage was larger than the original, designed to house children from dozens of different species. Human architects had worked with alien engineers to create a building that felt welcoming to many different forms of life. The playground had equipment suitable for creatures with tentacles, wings, or multiple legs. The classrooms used teaching methods that worked for minds that processed information in completely different ways. But the most important feature was the memorial garden where Amy's original flower beds had been. Now it contained plants from every world in the galaxy, tended by children who had come to learn about peace, cooperation, and the importance of protecting innocent life. The red flowers Amy had loved still grew there, but they were surrounded by blue spiral vines from the water worlds, silver crystal formations from the silicon-based planets, and dozens of other species that created a living symbol of galactic unity. Dr. Stone met Amy at the memorial garden on the morning before the ceremony. The war architect had retired after the Keltara demonstration, choosing to spend her remaining years teaching at the rebuilt orphanage. She looked older now, her hair completely white and her face marked by the weight of the decisions she had made during the war. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" Dr. Stone asked as they walked among the flowers. Amy nodded, though she felt nervous about addressing so many important delegates. "I keep thinking about that morning when the ships came. It feels strange that something so terrible led to something like this." Dr. Stone picked a red flower and handed it to Amy. "The galaxy needed to learn that actions have consequences. The Ralthari taught us that lesson by destroying the orphanage. We taught it back to them by destroying their empire. Now everyone understands the rules." The ceremony took place in the main assembly hall of the new orphanage, with delegates seated in a circle that symbolized equality among species. Ambassador Lisa Park, now Director of Human Diplomatic Services, introduced each speaker and explained the key provisions of the treaty. The Bright Star Accords were simple in concept, but revolutionary in practice. Any attack on civilian populations, especially children, would be considered a crime against all civilized life. The enforcement mechanism was equally simple. Such attacks would trigger immediate response from the Terran Defense Fleet, with consequences similar to what the Ralthari had experienced. When it was Amy's turn to speak, she walked to the center of the circle and looked around at the assembled delegates. Some were human, but most were aliens of various shapes and sizes. All of them watched her with respectful attention, understanding that she represented both the victims of galactic violence and the power to prevent future atrocities. 5 years ago, I was a little girl who liked to grow flowers, she began, in the simple, direct style that had become her trademark. I thought the galaxy was a safe place where good people took care of children and helped them grow into good adults. Then ships came from the sky and killed my friends, and I learned that some people think children are acceptable targets in their wars. She paused to let her words sink in. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably, remembering their own species' military histories. Today we are signing an agreement that says children will never be acceptable targets again. Not human children, not alien children, not any children anywhere in the galaxy. We are saying that anyone who hurts children will answer to all of us, working together to protect the innocent. The signing ceremony proceeded with formal dignity. Each species representative added their mark to the treaty document, committing their worlds to the new standard of behavior. Some signed eagerly, grateful for protection from more aggressive neighbors. Others signed reluctantly, understanding that refusal would mark them as potential threats to galactic peace. When the ceremony ended, Amy walked back to the memorial garden. Many of the delegates followed her, curious to see the place where the galactic order had begun to change. They found children from a dozen different species playing together among the flowers, laughing and chasing each other in games that transcended the barriers of biology and culture. An elderly delegate from the Serpentine Consortium approached Amy as she watched the children play. His species had been allied with the Ralthari during the war and had suffered economic consequences when the Empire collapsed. "Ambassador," he said in his careful, precise way of speaking, "my people have a question about enforcement. What happens if a species accidentally violates the Accords? What if civilian casualties occur despite good intentions?" Amy considered the question seriously. It was one she had discussed many times with Dr. Stone and the other human leaders. "Intent matters," she replied. "Accidents during legitimate military operations are different from deliberate targeting of children. The Accords include provisions for investigation and judgment. We are not looking for excuses to destroy civilizations. We are trying to prevent tragedies like what happened here." The delegate seemed relieved by her answer. Many species had worried that humanity's new power would be used carelessly or vindictively. But the humans had shown remarkable restraint since the Keltara demonstration, using their strength to maintain peace rather than expand their territory or impose their will on others. Captain Rex Morgan arrived that evening with a small escort fleet. He now commanded the Terran Defense Force, the military arm responsible for enforcing the Bright Star Accords. His ships patrolled the galaxy like guardian angels, appearing wherever tensions rose or conflicts threatened to harm innocent populations. Rex visited the memorial garden before attending the formal dinner for delegates. He had been present at many of the battles that destroyed Ralthari military power, but this was his first time seeing the place where it all started. He stood for a long time looking at the spot where the original orphanage had been destroyed, thinking about his own daughter and the choices that had led him to this moment. Amy found him there as the sun was setting over New Haven's peaceful landscape. Rex had been like an uncle to the orphanage survivors, checking on them regularly and making sure they had everything they needed as they grew up and entered their diplomatic careers. "How does it feel to be back here?" Rex asked. Amy looked around at the gardens and buildings that had risen from the ashes of tragedy. "It feels like we built something good from something terrible. The children who play here now will grow up in a galaxy where people like War Prime Kelthos cannot hurt them. That makes everything we went through worthwhile." Rex nodded, understanding the mixture of sadness and satisfaction in her voice. The war had achieved its objectives, but the cost had been enormous. Entire civilizations had been reshaped. Billions of lives had been changed forever. The galaxy now lived under the protection of human military power, which was a blessing for the innocent, but a constant reminder of what happened to those who chose violence over peace. The next morning, Amy received her next assignment, ambassador to the former Ralthari worlds, where scattered populations were learning to live without their ancient empire. It would be challenging work, helping a proud warrior species adapt to a peaceful existence under galactic oversight. But as she prepared to leave New Haven, Amy felt confident about the future. The galaxy had learned its lesson about the consequences of harming children, The Bright Star Accords provided a framework for peace backed by overwhelming force. And most importantly, children from dozens of species were growing up together in safety, learning to see each other as friends rather than enemies. Dr. Stone watched from her office window as Amy's transport ship lifted off toward the stars. The young woman who had survived humanity's darkest day was now helping to build its brightest future. The flowers in the memorial garden swayed in the breeze from the ship's engines, their red petals catching the morning sunlight like drops of blood transformed into symbols of hope. The galactic order had been rewritten in those terrible 12 minutes above Keltara. But the new order was kinder, safer, and more protective of innocent life than anything that had come before. The price had been terrible, but the result was a galaxy where children could grow flowers without fear of ships falling from the sky to burn everything they loved. Humanity had demonstrated total war to teach the galaxy about total peace. The lesson had been learned, and it would not be forgotten.